Mr. Purdon and Mr. Gary, are we ready to begin the meeting?
I believe so.
Okay. I will now call the regular meeting of the Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control Board to order. Due to the COVID-19 outbreak, we are conducting the monthly board meeting today by video teleconference. And the first thing we have on the agenda, we will have a recognition of a quorum. I will conduct a roll call of board members that are present on this teleconference. When I call your name, please say yes. Steve Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Colbert? Dr. May? Candace White? Marissa Neal?
Yes.
Thank you. And Dr. Daniel Gordy?
Here.
Thank you. First thing we have, do we have any introductions this morning, Mrs. Hamilton?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay. Ms. Hamilton, do we have any public recognitions this morning?
Yes, sir, we do.
Thank you.
The Association of Air Pollution Control Agencies, or APCA, is a national, nonprofit, consensus-driven organization focused on assisting state and local air quality agencies and personnel with implementation and technical issues related to the Clean Air Act. Created in 2012, APCA represents 48 state and local air pollution control agencies, including the district. Annually, APCA seeks nominations from public agencies, private entities, and individuals to identify groundbreaking technology, innovative practices, and exemplary operations in the field of air pollution control. Of particular interest are activities that are directly transferable to the operation of an air pollution control agency. Following a deliberative process, they annually award a Best Practices in Air Pollution Control award. The district was the first local agency to receive a Best Practices Award for our Clearing the Air workshop series. And now we're once again the first local air pollution control agency to receive a second Best Practices Award for our Air Quality Action Partner Program. The Air Quality Action Partner Program encourages local businesses to go beyond what is required to help improve air quality in Louisville and avoid exceedances of the national ambient air quality standards, and overall improve Louisville's air quality. Pollution reductions, whether regulatory or voluntary in nature, reduce pollution, and that's important. You can expect that other agencies will borrow this best practice in their jurisdictions to help them meet the national ambient air quality standards in their area, and as part of the US EPA's advanced program for areas that have attained the national ambient air quality standards for ozone and particulate matter. My thanks and congratulations this morning to Michelle King, the district's Executive Administrator and Director of Program Planning, and Byron Gary, the district's Regulatory Coordinator and the Board Secretary Treasurer, who will be accepting the award for us in person at next week's APCA conference in Raleigh. They took a recommendation from the multi-pollutant stakeholder group, developed a program, and implemented that program successfully, launching it into a working air pollution reduction process for Louisville. So again, my congratulations to Michelle and Byron, and my thanks to all the air quality action partners in Louisville who've joined us in making these voluntary reductions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, everyone. Next thing on the agenda is approval of the minutes. The minutes of the regular meeting held on August 17th, 2022 were distributed electronically for your review. Are there any changes or updates to the minutes by board members? Hearing none, the minutes are adopted as submitted. Thank you. Mr. Gary, has anyone registered to make a comment this morning?
Yes, Chairman Hilton. Mark Apple has registered to speak. Andy, if you're able, could you please promote Mr. Apple? Mr. Apple, once you're promoted, if you are able, please turn on your video and unmute yourself. You can speak.
Mr. Atwell has been promoted. It takes a second for the audio and video to catch up.
Looks like we may have lost Mr. Atwell. Mr. Atwell, are you still on the meeting?
It looks as if he has dropped off.
We have no other speaker registrations. I'll let the board know if Mr. Atwell rejoins us.
Just let us know, we can come back to him. Or, Mr. Garrett, has anyone provided written response this morning?
No, Chairman Helton.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public in the Edison room that wish to make a comment? Okay. Are there any other members of the public that wish to make a brief comment on this teleconference?
I see no raised hands.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, if you want to make a comment, please raise your hand. You said you haven't seen any raised hands. Thank you. Mr. Gary, does anyone wish to speak?
I don't believe so.
Okay. That completes the public comment portion of the meeting. Now we're down to unfinished business. There is no unfinished business today. New business, there is no new business. Committee reports, no committees met in the last month. Staff reports, Mrs. Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Chairman Hilton. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last day of summer. So even though fall will begin tomorrow, our ozone season extends through October the 30th. This weather this summer has been challenging, and it continues to be challenging, including yesterday. We did experience some elevated ozone yesterday. It was a very hot day, low humidity compared to the day before, and really very low winds. So at this point, the Louisville Metropolitan Statistical Area demonstrates compliance with the National Ambient Air Quality Standard of 70 parts per billion for ozone based on preliminary data. As with all of our data, we continue our data quality assurance, essentially looking at all of our data with a fine-tooth comb to be sure that that remains the case on a final basis. With that, I'm going to give you an update on where we're at with ozone. Please stop me if you need clarification. The district has completed its work on a request for redesignation several weeks ago. That was passed through the Kentucky Division for Air Quality and the Environment and Energy Protection Cabinet and has been submitted to US EPA. They are in the process of preparing their submittal, which will be proposed in the Federal Register for 30 days public comment, and then finalized thereafter. So that's where we're at on our path to demonstrating compliance with the 2015 ozone standard. At the same time, because the Clean Air Act is both a continuous improvement program and a prescriptive continuous improvement program, EPA finalized its bump up of our area and 31 other areas to moderate non-attainment. The reason for this is because we did not attain the marginal non-attainment date for demonstrating compliance based on our 2018 to 2020 data set. We still showed we were in non-attainment in August of 2021. We've since, with our 2019 to 2020 data, demonstrated that the area meets the ozone NAAQS, and that's why we've prepared and submitted that request for redesignation. EPA finalized their bump up for our area and those 31 other areas, including northern Kentucky, on September the 15th. So what does this mean? as I said, although we didn't demonstrate attainment with the 2018 to 2020 design value set, we do now. We've satisfied all the requirements for the required state implementation plan elements, and our draft redesignation request is now with US EPA for their approval. Given the bump up, the deadlines and requirements for moderate non-attainment will require us to work on a state implementation plan submittal that may include rules to implement reasonably achievable control technology and reasonably achievable control measures, or RACM, and a reasonable further progress 15% plan for us to submit in January of 2023. That work will go on concurrently while EPA is approving our request for redesignation. Once approved by US EPA, which will take place, we hope, in a few short months, redesignation to attainment will relieve us of further planning and control requirements under the moderate non-attainment designation. So, got two things going on parallel tracks. One is we've reached attainment and we've completed all the work necessary under the Clean Air Act to show EPA that the area satisfies the marginal non-attainment designation. That parallel track that EPA is on for them is prescriptive. In February of this year, we expected that they would have finalized this action. They delayed it. They also got sued on the 2008 standard that they hadn't completed yet. And so collectively, they moved forward with both actions on September the 15th. The 2008 doesn't apply to us, but the 2015 bump up to moderate will require us to do some work now that perhaps in the long run will prove unnecessary. We work with EPA on our request for redesignation weekly. The cabinet is still preparing the request for redesignation for Northern Kentucky. We expect that they'll finalize that internally and send that off to EPA in the next few weeks. But we continue to be in touch with them to be sure we understand their timing, and they have assured us that they pre-drafted as much of their Federal Register notice as they could to speed this process along. We do expect to see it enter the Federal Register shortly. Once we see that, of course, we'll send an email to the board, and we'll let folks know that that's out there. Are there any questions about that?
Yeah, go on, Steve.
So what exactly goes into the Federal Register?
They will take the package that we prepared here in Louisville that went out for public comment. It includes Jefferson County and portions of Bullitt and Oldham County. They will assess our demonstration, and they'll go out publicly saying, we've reviewed the district's request for redesignation, and based on the following things, we are going to propose approving this. And here's why.
And you believe that's what they're going to say?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We've worked diligently and collaboratively to be sure that we dotted all of the I's and crossed the T's, and I don't mean to be glib about that, but because of where we sit, our metropolitan statistical area and our non-attainment area includes Clark and Floyd County. And so Clark and Floyd County in Indiana in Region 5 EPA has already been approved and redesignated as attainment. The same for Cincinnati. Region 5 also approved that area to attainment. So we have Louisville and Northern Kentucky in Region 4, and we've addressed all the comments that others have received on their requests for for redesignation to attainment, and work to be sure that EPA understood the data we presented and the way that we presented that data, and that it satisfied their comments during our public comment period. We did not receive any comments from the public, but we did receive some comments from US EPA during that public comment period. And we worked to be sure that we understood those comments and that we satisfied them in our final draft. So we're fairly confident that we have done everything we need to do, and that process should be fairly straightforward.
Okay. What are the, just refresh my memory, what are the designations for the ozone? Is it attainment, non-attainment, and what's the other one? I thought it was marginal.
Unclassifiable. So,
Unclassifiable.
right, broadly speaking, an area can be in attainment. It meets the standard.
Right, which is 70 parts per billion.
For ozone, yes.
Ozone, okay.
And this is for any national ambient air quality standard for any of the criteria pollutants,
Right.
those 6 criteria pollutants. If an area does not have sufficient air monitoring data to determine whether it meets that national ambient air quality standard, EPA may deem that area unclassifiable.
Okay.
And typically where we see that is sort of towards the interior of the country, kind of that flyover area, where there isn't a lot of industry nor a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so a county may not have a monitor, may not be required to have one under 40 CFR Part 58. And so that area is unclassifiable.
Okay.
They won't assume that it meets the standard if they don't have data to demonstrate that. For non-attainment areas, there is a laundry list of elevated
Steps.
designations, non-attainment designations.
Okay.
With those elevated non-attainment designations, there are a myriad of additional steps and control measures that are required. Marginal non-attainment has the fewest. Severe non-attainment or above, they have a multitude of steps that they must satisfy under the Clean Air Act in order to remain eligible for federal funding and to continue to demonstrate that they're making progress towards attaining those standards. Where we see this kind of come into play with overlapping standards and overlapping areas of very high non-attainment, it's actually California,
Okay.
and that's for both ozone and particulate matter.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from board members? Thank you.
Very good. As in the past, we've seen an increase in the number of odor complaints when the weather turns hot and dry. That includes now. Recently, we've seen an uptick in sewer odor-related complaints in the last month, particularly around the Morris Foreman wastewater treatment plant and nearby neighborhoods. So we've scheduled some after-hours investigations by our community compliance officers to observe these areas where they have a high number of odor reports at the time that we're receiving those odor reports, so that we can observe the ambient conditions under which people are making these reports and determine if there is a violation of our standards. So are there any questions about that?
Most of those reports after work hours?
Yes. Primarily, we're seeing those come in through the Smell My City app.
Mm-hmm.
Those go to both APCD and to certain people at MSD as well. Any questions on that?
No.
Very good. We've talked a lot in the past about hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, including HFC 23, which is a potent greenhouse gas created as a byproduct during the production of certain fluorinated compounds, including HCFC 22, which is manufactured by Chemours here in Louisville. While HCFC 22 is an ozone-depleting substance that has been phased out domestically under the Clean Air Act in line with the international phase-out occurring under the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer, it can still be produced as a feedstock to make other chemicals, including some that can be substituted for chemicals that themselves have a high greenhouse gas potency. HFC 23 is not an air toxic, and it's not a criteria pollutant. It doesn't pose a direct risk to local communities, but climate change does threaten public health, and especially those that may be vulnerable based on where they live or their circumstances. In December 2020, Congress passed the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act and required EPA to establish requirements for all entities that emit HFC 23 to control those emissions for greenhouse gas reductions. As a consequence, EPA requires that no later than October 1st of 2022, so just a few short weeks away, no more than 0.1% of HFC 23 created on a facility line may be emitted, including any HFC 23 emissions during transportation to and destruction at a different facility, as compared to the amount of the chemical intentionally produced on the line. A little complex and gets a little technical, but that's the way EPA set up their rule. EPA estimates that from 2022 through 2050, these HFC 23 emission control requirements will have reduced a cumulative emission of more than 7,000 metric tons of HFC 23, or more than 3.7 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent annually. They estimate that that will result in a net present cumulative benefit of $6.4 billion in 2020 dollars at a 3% discount rate. That's all interesting information, but it's quite necessary that they take these steps to reduce the emission of HFC 23. As part of their rulemaking, EPA also established a provision that allows chemical producers to request up to 2 6-month extensions of the October 1st compliance date. To achieve these required reductions, Chemours applied for a permit from the district to construct certain necessary equipment to capture its emissions of HFC 23 and send them to its facility in West Virginia for destruction. Following a very robust public participation process, the district issued a construction permit to Chemours early this spring to complete that work. Therein ends the district's involvement in EPA's implementation of its HFC 23 reduction rule on paper. In early August, Chemours reached out to the district to report that the company was on target to begin capturing HFC 23 by October 1st as required, but to let us know that they would be seeking an extension from EPA to complete compliance testing on the newly installed and operating equipment. Shortly thereafter, EPA reached out to the district as well. The district has no role in approving Chemours' request for an extension, but both the company and EPA heard, very clearly I might add, the community's request during the public comment period on the district's proposed construction permit for more transparency about EPA's HFC 23 reduction program. As a result of EPA's follow-up with the district, EPA has added information about its decision to grant Chemours a 6-month extension to its webpage that tracks the control and reduction of HFC 23 emissions. There, EPA states the following: one entity out of 9 nationally, Chemours Company FC LLC, timely requested a 6-month extension for its production facility in Louisville, Kentucky, due in part to supply chain difficulties that delayed acquisition of the necessary equipment to control HFC 23 emissions. EPA acknowledges that the primary purpose of the extension is to allow time to measure, validate, and optimize the effectiveness of the process change at the Chemours Louisville Works facility, and that Chemours expects to complete this validation by the end of the year. EPA granted this extension with the understanding that Chemours will have all necessary equipment on-site, operational, and effective by October 1st, 2022, and will be running that equipment from that date onward. With that understanding and their review of the submitted information, EPA granted the request to extend the compliance date for HFC 23 emission control requirements at the Louisville Works to April 1st, 2023. EPA will monitor the facility's progress on meeting the emission control requirements and will post status updates to their website as information becomes available for public release. This will help ensure interested stakeholders are aware of the facility's current status and progress toward meeting the HFC 23 emission limit. We will provide a link to EPA's webpage with that information on our website. I can't stress enough here that this transparency measure is a direct result of our community's requests to us that EPA provide more transparency through the process. Even though we were working on our construction permit, we shared those comments with US EPA. We also, at the same time we were working on that, observed that there may be an error in some risk data that US EPA had used to evaluate the environmental justice impacts of their rulemaking. I've been at this a long time, and this is the first time in my experience when we raised our concern that their data did not jive with our understanding of our data, and we asked for a meeting that we hopped on to a WebEx meeting to be introduced to the head of the National Stratospheric Ozone Program, her deputy, several other high-ranking EPA personnel in that program who apologized because they inadvertently lumped risk data from Geismar, Louisiana into some of the data for Louisville. That gave us a remarkable opportunity to raise, even beyond those folks we sent the comments we received to, about how important it was for this community to be heard as part of their process. One of the things we heard was a drive for more transparency. It was a great conversation. There will be another rulemaking on the HFC reduction requirements in 2024, and EPA has committed to reaching out to the district as they start that process so that we can work collaboratively with our stakeholders in the community to have them ready to be part of that process. Overall, that is a very successful result. We appreciate the comments that we received here locally. We appreciate EPA hearing those as well. Are there any questions about that?
I have some.
Okay.
What was the impact of the error in the data?
So when EPA did their regulatory impact assessment, they included what is one of the first environmental justice assessments that we've seen in any rulemaking. They assessed for these 9 facilities the cancer risk at a certain per mile radius. So they looked at 8 of these facilities and the cancer risk 1 mile around the facility. They then looked 3 miles out with more facilities, and they compared and contrast what the cancer risk was for certain areas. As part of their rulemaking process, they heard comments that said, well, 3 miles isn't really very big. You should go out 5 and 10 miles. They did. It's when they went out 5 and 10 miles that they picked up that data from Geismar, Louisiana. So to give you kind of a brief update on that, background for urban areas nationally is about 32 in a million. Here in Kentucky, that urban average is about 31 in a million, slightly below that national average. For 1 mile around the Chemours facility, my recollection is that the cancer risk was at 36 in a million. At 3 miles out, 37 in a million. At 5 and 10 miles out, our recollection is it's in line with that. It doesn't change much. But problematically, when they pulled in the Geismar, Louisiana data, it went from 36, 37, 105 in a million, and 97 in a million. Because that's what the cancer risk is in Geismar, Louisiana. 5 and 10 miles out for us, it's about 36, 37 in a million. Right in that recollection? So yes, when we suddenly saw that we'd been at 37 in a million at 3 miles out, and they published data that said, well, at 5 miles, it's 105 in a million, and 10 miles out, it's 97. That does not in any way jive with our understanding of our air toxics program, the Strategic Toxic Air Reduction Program, and was a big red flag for us. I will admit that Matt King and I spent a great deal of time trying to figure out what the issue was. With some pretty spirited conversations, several folks in here will confirm. And it turns out they just confused Geismar, Louisiana's data with Louisville. And they fixed it, and they've republished it to correct that data, which is very important because as they conduct this second rulemaking, we want to be sure that everyone understands where we're at to help guide us to where we need to go next.
I appreciate that's the result, but what's the impact of that result on the process that occurred? Did it have a change in the?
No, that's a great question, Steve. The regulatory impact assessment, you know, as I said, has the first analysis of EJ in it. And because HFC 23 is not an air toxic, it's understandable why EPA evaluated it, but there isn't any change their regulation will drive to reduce cancer risk from air toxics. It's more information than, you know, decision-making. It shows, though, that areas around these plants have a higher burden from air pollution just as a general starting point.
Can I add that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think what they were showing was, although the HFCs aren't considered carcinogenic, but they are typically emitted in areas with a lot of other pollution, those cumulative impacts. And so almost everywhere where you have an HFC facility, you have other toxic emitting facilities, or that facility itself emits other toxics. And so typically, that's your higher risk closer. And they were showing that that has been clustered around those same communities. And as you get farther away, that risk typically goes down. In our case, we said, well, why would it go up further away? We thought of Rubbertown as the area to focus on toxic reduction. If EPA knows about some mystery source further away, we need to figure that out, which wasn't the case. But it was interesting, it didn't go down as much as some other communities further away. It's not really good news, but I think they thought they would be showing clearly high risk close to these HFC facilities, not because of the HFC, but because of the clustering of other industries and other pollutants. But then, you know, the erroneous results made it think it's more risky 10 miles away in other parts of the community, and that was not the case. So,
Which has to lead to some public confusion and concern.
Yeah, well, it certainly caused us to be concerned.
Sure.
But I will share a link to that regulatory impact assessment and a snapshot of their assessment. I will note that Louisville has the highest number of TRI reporting companies in the assessment, even at 1 mile, 3 miles, and all the way out to 10 miles. So that our risk is comparatively low is both a function of the STAR program and the sources that we have reporting to TRI.
I have one more question.
Uh-huh.
So who determines or inspects or ensures that the equipment is up and running October 1? Is it the feds send somebody in to do that?
So they have a requirement that companies make reports. So there's a reporting requirement in the HFC reduction rule that tells all 8 of these companies that on October 1st, they have to start providing data to US EPA showing that they're either destroying that byproduct on site, which will take place at all the other facilities except Louisville. And in Louisville's case, they have to demonstrate that their capture is working and that they're controlling this all the way through to its destruction point.
It's EPA's rule, but a lot of air pollution is done through self-monitoring or third-party testing. But I would assume they would inspect randomly and verify those things.
Any other questions?
Well, that's just what I was going to ask. Well, what Matt said is who's going to be doing the measurement and what sort of quality assurance
So again,
and auditing is there?
with respect to that part of EPA's rule, EPA sets the requirements. So we have, for many of our rules, when we have a testing requirement, there's usually an EPA test method that is identified as the preferred test method. Some allow the district to approve an alternate test method. Many of them, however, the rules that we implement on a day-to-day basis, we can't alter the test method. It's specified in the rule, and most of that testing, Dr. Coburn, is done by an independent third party. in order to make that kind of break in accountability.
Okay. Thanks.
All right.
I just have one quick question. You know, we talked about HCFC 22. Now, that substance was banned in 2020 that I looked up. But the federal government places no limit on the amount of HCFC 22 or HFC 23 that these facilities can emit.
So I'm going to update that.
Okay.
Because in December of 2020, Congress stepped in and said, you have to reduce HFC 23.
Right.
So your information may have preceded that,
Okay.
and now they must reduce it substantially. The HCFC 22 may be manufactured as a feedstock for other chemicals.
So what if they, suppose they want to increase HCF 22? 23 is a byproduct of 22.
So this new rule that American Innovation and Manufacturing Act and the regulations that EPA adopted in response to that, over the next 15 years, it drives down the ability of companies to emit more. Whether they increase production or not, Carl, they are beholden to continued reductions to their emissions. They just got to figure out a way to, they're going to make more, they're going to have to figure out a way to do so while at the same time dropping their emissions.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So EPA continues with its own rulemaking. As the board may be aware, the district is one of 9 programs nationally that's retained the delegation of the Risk Management Plan program. This is an unusual part of the Clean Air Act. Most of the work that we do is geared towards reducing emissions. This is actually geared towards reducing the potential for chemical accidents. So it is a very forward-looking analysis that companies are required to do. Because of Rubbertown, we believe it's important for us to retain delegation of this program because EPA has publicly stated in the past that they hope to inspect 3% of the RMP facilities nationwide on an annual basis. That's not sufficient. So we run the program here in collaboration with our emergency management agency. We pay for an inspector to be our boots on the ground for chemical accidents, and then we inspect those facilities every 3 years. So put it down into about 30% to 30% and cover everybody. The board, in March of 2021, as you may remember, strengthened our risk management plan program beyond the federal program. It's kind of a tortured history, but I'll give you the nutshell. January of 2017, the Obama administration finalized some rules strengthening the risk management plan program. That suite of regulations, along with many that were passed in those waning days of the previous administration, were pulled back for reconsideration by the incoming administration. We adopted the necessary updates to our program to match the federal program that was ultimately adopted during the Trump administration, and some additional elements in order to provide more information to our community and to require companies to look deeper if they had a large-scale incident. EPA has come back. They have additional updates to the regulations that they proposed on August the 18th. Public comment period for this currently runs through October 30th. So we'd like to come to the board next month to kind of do a deep dive through what EPA is proposing to add to their rule. Any federal change that's more stringent than our program, we of course will need to update our rule. So it'll help the public be sure that they understand what's out there for them to comment on at the federal level, and it will help the board be aware of what may be coming down the pike for your work. Are there any questions about that? Thank you. On September 8th, the district held an in-person and virtual public hearing on Clariant's request for a construction permit to allow construction of new equipment for the automated transfer of materials in lieu of manual transfer, construction of equipment to replace older equipment, and piping to allow operation through multiple control chains. Public hearing was well attended. Our thanks to Steve Sullivan for hosting that meeting. Marisa, thank you for joining us at that meeting as well. And to the district staff who went to the library and set up the meeting and then ran the meeting. Very good meeting. To date, we've received several hundred comments, both in writing and orally as part of the district's permitting process. We will answer in writing all comments that we've received. We will produce a response to comment document that will become a part of the record of our decision-making with respect to a final permitting decision. It's going to take us some time to respond to all the comments that we've received, but we'll post the final decision, including the response to comment document, on our recent actions page, notify folks accordingly, and share a copy of those materials with the board at that time as well. Are there any questions about that?
Do you have a time requirement to respond to the comments?
We do not. There are a lot of comments.
There's a lot.
A lot of really good comments. So I know that Matt and his team have been meeting to review those comments and to begin the drafting process. There's another spot in my director's report where I talk about how technical and complex our work is and how challenging it is for us to really try to effectively communicate that complexity in simple terms. It takes a village. Our permitting team will draft these, then there will be other readers within the agency to read it to be sure they understand it, and it will go from someone with more technical and more Clean Air Act experience all the way down to the new guy, so we can be sure we kind of hit the right mark. This fall, Louisville Metro will switch from PeopleSoft, our time entry software, and LEAP, our financial management software, to Workday for HR and financials, and use new time entry software called UKG. Go live for the Workday for finance and HR is October 3rd. UKG go live is October 30th. So district staff, along with all of Metro government, are being trained on using these new systems and getting ready for an upgraded user experience. That's a nice way to say, please bear with us over the next few weeks as we deal with everybody's favorite thing, change. Metro HR and the Office of Management and Budget have worked hard to support us through this change by training a core group of Metro personnel to train us on the new system, training the trainers. For the district, Monica Little, our administrative coordinator, and Rachel Smith, our personnel manager, have capably taken on the task of training us, so my thanks to them in advance as we get ready to go live. In addition to rolling out these new systems, at the same time, Metro HR will be launching a Metro-wide compensation study beginning on September 27th. This study, which is the first I've seen in my now 36th year of environmental regulatory experience, asks each employee to complete a fairly comprehensive survey about their day-to-day work. HR has indicated that some salaries may increase and some titles may change as a result of the process, which is being managed by an outside contractor. So I'm looking forward to this process. They've given us a fairly lengthy time to complete the survey. It has review opportunity for supervisors and managers to take a look at their staff's assessment of their own work. My biggest concern with this process is that kind of as a group, APCD staff are very humble, and it will be difficult for them to really fully, I think, assess their work accurately. So, any questions on that? We'll let you know as that process moves forward. Finally, I am privileged to observe the district staff as they work each day to improve Louisville's air quality. Their work is technically challenging, complex, and tremendously important as a public health measure. Everyone here brings their best professional judgment air quality and environmental expertise, community concerns, and relationships to their efforts to thoughtfully address the pressing issues at hand. I am grateful for their dedication to the district's mission and appreciate their commitment to solve problems, make decisions, think critically, communicate more effectively, and collaborate extensively with EPA and our peer agencies, the community, regulated sources, and a continually growing group of partners in improving air quality. We have received a multitude of comments, and I appreciate the district staff's thoughtful approach to hearing those comments and responding to them. Are there any questions?
I just have one. Could you give us an update on what's going on in Lake Forest? And when do you think the proposed draft permit will be submitted?
So for those of you who are not aware, there is a concrete batch plant that has been proposed for a location across from Lake Forest. It's on Aiken Road, kind of by the Frank Audie Nursery. That proposal went through a zoning process. It was zoned as industrial in 1982, and so had a limited zoning review, which was completed recently in March. But there have been questions raised by the community about their ability to have been involved in that process. As a result, the applicant for the proponent of that project has resubmitted his project to the Planning Commission. It's our understanding that the project is being narrowed, and he is seeking additional review from the Planning Commission. I don't have a date for that yet.
Okay.
But he also, at the same time, submitted a revised application to the district to further narrow the construction and operation of the concrete batch plant there. We are continuing our review. The next step for us will be to set a public hearing and begin a public comment period, which we'll do in our public way, public notice, posted on our proposed actions webpage, and get that public hearing set up for our work.
Okay. Do they need a construction permit to start? Because they've already started the foundation work for that cement plant.
So they do not need a construction permit for earth moving.
Right. They
There are ancillary structures that are also part of the project, including a shop and several other out structures that don't require permitting from APCD.
Okay.
So we'll be sure that we understand the work going on to be clear about that. So my guess is that you'll see something from Planning and Design on an upcoming Planning Commission meeting, and that will move that into the Planning Commission review process, and at the same time, we'll get ours out for public notice. There'll be a 30-day public comment period.
Okay.
And a public hearing within that time frame.
But if Planning Commission denies, the operation and it just stops, I'm assuming.
I'm not going to comment on
Okay.
the Planning Commission's work.
No, I mean,
I'm not really familiar with what would happen in that instance.
okay, but would you continue, would the district continue to do that work?
Our
on the permit,
permitting is not
regardless?
contingent on
on anything else?
having approval of the Planning Commission. So it could continue.
Okay.
An applicant, of course, anytime an applicant hits a hurdle with another part of the construction process, they can withdraw their application. We've seen that happen in the past with other operations, but that would be up to the applicant. With that ends my director's report.
Thank you.
Steve Grivette is here to provide a presentation on the district's compliance process and our new dashboard on excess emissions.
Went too far too fast, Byron. There we go. Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Gravett. I'm the Compliance and Enforcement Manager. Last month, we had a presentation from Matt King on industrial permitting. I'm going to continue that forward this month with an industrial compliance overview. My team for industrial compliance has a supervisor, DJ Donald Mountain. We've got 5 engineers, a compliance officer that handles asbestos, a field technician that handles gas stations, and a small business compliance assistance coordinator. Today, we're going to focus on the work of the engineers. They were the ones that go out to the industrial sources that Matt talked about permitting last month. So the type of activities that we do as our day-to-day work are inspections, periodic report reviews, stack test observations, and reviewing excess emission reports. So when we do inspections, it does exactly what you think it is. Go out in the field, observe the equipment, review the records. Some of the things we look for, throughputs, so that's how many widgets a company makes, how much paint they use. That often ties into limits in their permit or even how they calculate their emissions, so those are pretty important. And control device parameters are another thing we always look at. So how hot is the thermal oxidizer going? How much flow rate does the scrubber have through it? Those are the things that impact how much control efficiency is getting, and that's the kind of things we look for. In the periodic report, we get reports from companies constantly. There's semi-annual reports that come in for Title V and FEDUC sources. Some of the federal standards require quarterly reportings on certain things. We've got an annual compliance certification that comes in on Title V and FEDUC sources. Lots of reporting comes in, stack test reports. Stack test observations, we try to go out in the field and observe them all. We don't make it to all of them, but it helps to have eyes on them while they're doing that process. And then excess emission reporting, I'll talk about a lot in a few minutes. So as I said, when we go on site, we go out and look at all the equipment and make sure there's no changes from what's been permitted. We'll spot check records. Some of the records are kept monthly, weekly, daily, hourly, down to minute data on some of the thermal oxidizer temperature requirements. So we can't check everything, but we do go in, check sufficient amounts. If we see problems or irregularities, we'll look in more depth. Most of the time, our inspections are unannounced to not give people time to prep. During the pandemic, though, with the health and safety issues we've been dealing with, and everybody's been dealing with for the past couple of years, we've been announcing them to make sure that people have safety people on site for us to walk around with and who knows what's going on.
What triggers the point in which you won't do that? I mean, just some declaration from CDC or something?
So early in the pandemic, when everybody was unsure, we started doing off-site inspections. So we would request a ton of records so that we could verify what was going on, but we would not go on site. A lot of the control rooms are pretty tight, and we were trying to make sure that we weren't exposing our workers or their workers to issues. Especially things like power plants, we were trying to stay out of critical infrastructure. We didn't want to hit sewer plants and be the instigator for a LG&E spread. So this is an example of one of the reports we got from a company. They were, this is set during permitting. They set what the companies are going to report and the time frames. So it'll be emissions and throughputs pretty much universally. A FEDUC company, a synthetic miner, will have limits that they have standard 100 tons per year of the criteria pollutants and 25 and 10 of the HAPs. They'll have to report that every time. They also report control device parameters, throughputs for critical pieces of their plant, any exceedances that they've had in the past 6 months or a year. The annual compliance certification is a special case. That's an EPA required report. It's the RO of the responsible official of the plant has to certify compliance with every term in their permit. So these reports will be hundreds of pages long. They'll have the compliance activity or the standard written out and any deviations from it written, or whether they were in continuous compliance. This also has a section at the end for anything that was an irregularity at the plant over the course of the year that may be a non-compliance issue, they have to report that as well. So a lot of our violations come out of reporting and annual compliance certification. Stack tests are also set, the frequency of a stack test is set during permitting, as Matt talked about last month. We go out and observe that. It's the physical, they put something in the stack and measure what's going through the stack. They can't do that all the time, so this is when they set control device parameters. So we'll go out and watch and make sure they're following the EPA reference method, make sure everything's hooked up, make sure the plant is running how it's supposed to. So they're setting control device parameters. Are they running the thermal oxidizer at the temperature it's supposed to be? If they're running ovens, are they running the ovens as hot as they're supposed to be? Are they running the equipment to the capacity it's supposed to be? Are they burning enough fuel? Are they painting enough product? Those are the things we're observing when we're out on the stack test. So excess emission reporting, we've got a District Rule 107. If a company experiences a malfunction or has a startup or shutdown planned or unplanned that may result in excess emissions, they're supposed to report to it. Excess emissions aren't just numeric standards, they can include work practices. So even if the control goes down and they've managed to maintain low enough emissions that it does not violate a limit, they've still violated a emissions limit on running the control at all times. So we get a lot of these. There's a monthly board report that you all have seen, but the board report doesn't give all of the information. So we've come up with a new report that is on our website. It's a dashboard. Matt Mudd, our public information person, created a website that kind of explains the process. It's linked to here. And this new dashboard allows people, the public, reporters, board members, to search by company, by address, by zip code, by date range, and it will return all of the excess emission events that we've had reported to us since December of last year when we started putting this data set together. You can narrow it down, and it also includes a link to the final report from the company, so you can see what went wrong, what was emitted, whether any emissions limits were violated, and any steps they've taken to prevent that from happening in the future. We're going to update it once a month. These reports aren't meant to be a first responder, what's happening in real time. It's more of a what happened, and take some time, think about it, figure out how you're going to fix it, and not have it happen again. So we're going to update these once a month after we have a chance to get the final reports and provide all the information we will get. Unfortunately, I'm not going to run through a little demo of it. If anybody has any questions on it, please let me know. I realize I went through that quick. Anybody have any questions?
I have one quick question. Can a private citizen request an open record request of your inspection reports, or are those confidential?
No, those are public records.
Those public records. So they can submit a open record request, and
yes,
you'll send them a copy of that inspection report for that facility?
yes.
Okay.
So some of the records might include confidential business information. Companies have a way of saying that is confidential business information, and that information wouldn't be in an inspection report. But the inspection report is primarily going to talk about things that are required by the permits for emissions.
Very good presentation. Any questions from board members?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hampton, for the director's report. Are you finished?
I am finished, thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the reports, our quality data. Those reports were distributed electronically. Are there any questions by board members for the our quality data report?
I got a comment that's not really related to us, but I was reading an article talking about, hey, the top 10 areas that are high in PM2.5, and Northern Kentucky and Cincinnati was listed as one of those. That was somewhat surprising.
Do you remember the article that you read that in?
I do not. There's so many things that come across, but I do not.
We'll take a look at that.
Yeah, I was surprised at that.
Try to find that. Thank you.
Okay. What about?
I have a question on your quality report on ozone, which has to do with calculating the design values. It's supposed the design value is based on the 3-year average of the fourth highest. Okay. So, you take those 3 fourth highest numbers, average them, and then truncate them so that in ppbs, it's reported to the nearest 2 digits, or 3 in hundreds. Or do you take the 3-year averages, first truncate them, for example, from 71.7 parts per billion to 71, do you truncate those values
Dr. Coburn?
and then average them and then truncate them again? How is
Believe it or not, this was a topic of conversation earlier.
Because you could get a different number for that design value
Billy?
depending on the procedure used.
Right.
Billy, would you like to explain the,
Yes, I'll do my best. I know
Okay.
that
hey,
we
Billy,
definitely,
I'm sorry.
truncate the values.
To be sure everyone can hear you, can you step up closer to the podium? Thank you.
Yes, the values are truncated and not rounded. It's very prescriptive in the regulation, how those are calculated. Luckily for us, we can take all the official numbers, which is not the board report. That's more of a quick look.
Sure.
Our official concentrations go into AQS, and then the air quality system calculates those for these regulations. So I believe all those numbers are truncated, and then the final number is as well.
Okay. Thank you.
We don't have any discretion, though, in deciding which.
Oh,
way to
so that
truncate.
design values, you don't calculate it, the AQS system does.
Correct.
Right.
Okay. So then it really doesn't matter in these reports that 71.7 might in another table be reported as 72. Really doesn't matter.
The board reports are designed to give you a little quicker information.
Yeah.
Our quality assurance process can take quite a while. So sometimes they could contain either, overlook an error or the quality assurance hasn't been completed and something could drop out or be added.
Yeah.
AQS is the official word on that.
Got it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was just going to add one thing. From a SIP perspective, we do use their numbers in our submission, and then EPA, of course, reviews it against that AQS, which is the official. But we will use our numbers, as
Okay.
Billy explained, that being calculated in our submission. For example, our ozone redesignation request did use the board report to use our final numbers as certified, but then EPA will check them as they are doing their proposal against their calculations for AQS. So they do have a purpose beyond just the board reports for SIP purposes.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Any other questions?
Thanks for clearing that up.
Excess emission report, any questions or comments regarding that report? Excess emission report? And the complaint and investigation status summary? I don't think I had any. That looked good. I don't know that one. So I will now adjourn the regular meeting of the board, and thank you for your participation. The next board meeting is Wednesday, October the 19th at 10 a.m. Thank you so much for your attendance.